Welcome back to another edition of NBA Fantasy Baller Value Bin Plays for Thursday, March 16th, 2017. Last night was a joke. Absolute joke, to say the least. If you listen to the podcast, we had Jeremy Lamb, Nemanja Bjelica, and Ivica Zubac. And the only thing I can say is that with Jeremy Lamb, I said that I didn't think he was going to be a guy I rostered too much. I didn't think he was going to have a good bounce back game or a good next start, because he typically hasn't this year, honestly. I mean, the guy's gotten a handful of starts and he puts up like late 30s, early 40s the first game, and 19, 20 points the second game after we've seen his price go up. So it's great because we could be like, oh man, he's averaging 28, 30 fantasy points a game when he starts, but that's such an irrelevant statistic. Averaging 25 over 2 games. So was it 50 and 0? Because that's a 25 average. Was it 26 and 24? It's very important what compilation goes into that average, because if we're talking about 4 games, which we could easily go back and look at, and we could see that the range was like this, you're taking a lot of risk rostering him, and that's what a lot of people did last night. And the Charlotte Hornets were just an awful, awful mess, which isn't really that surprising. They're just not that good. Kemba Walker put up unquestionably his worst outing of the year, was invisible. Thank goodness I had no exposure there. Let's move on to Nemanja Bjelica. He had 9 fantasy points in about 10 minutes. He was going to see most likely around the 30-minute mark, because we had Gorgie Dieng with 3 early fouls, and he was playing good defense, and then he twisted his ankle. So that was good. That was a lineup killer right there. And if that wasn't enough, Ivica Zubac showed that he's a rookie in the NBA. Nothing more needs to be said about that. The Lakers are still an absolutely awful basketball team. So all we can do from here is move on to the next one. I will guarantee you I will go back to the well on just about all of those guys, probably even as soon as tomorrow if Zubac is playing. But let's talk about tonight. Let's look at what our model projects. Of course, why would I stay in our model? I already started to move on to my hockey lineups, but it will only take 1 second here for this to load. All right, let's take a look at some value plays that our projection system seems to like tonight. And truthfully, there's not that many. Jonas Valanciunas. Jameer Nelson is an interesting case because on DraftKings, his price is down to $4K now. And we already know that Chandler and Gallinari are out. Isn't the worst guy that you could look into Corey Joseph, who I will probably have no exposure to whatsoever. Mason Plumlee kind of goes both ways. 58 on FanDuel. I think he's 55 on DraftKings. And that's it. Our module tonight really, really seems to prefer just playing guys under the 9K price range. And since Russell Westbrook's really the only top dollar play, you don't have to kind of fidget around. For what it's worth, for 50 lineups, our projection software puts Russ in 7 of those 50 optimal lineups. So take that for what it's worth. I'm not sure exactly what it's worth, but let's move on now to our value plays for today. And again, a lot of these guys are guys I just don't feel extremely confident in, but I think that they could pay off. Let's start off with Joe Johnson of the Utah Jazz. 7,400 fantasy draft, 36 FanDuel, 38 over on DraftKings. He's seen minutes approaching 30 in the last 2 games because Derek Favors have been out, and they're really trying to figure out how they're going to construct a lineup. So anybody seeing nearly 30 minutes, and this is a guy who was a good basketball player. I mean, yes, he got an overinflated contract after a monster year. That happens a lot in all sports. I'm not going to hold that against him. That's what teams thought was the best idea. But we know that the upside exists with Joe Johnson. What am I expecting here? I'm fully expecting him to start, see around the 30-minute mark, and I think he could give you 20 to 24 fantasy points. I mean, we're not talking about a sexy outing here. It's nothing that you're going to be like, damn, Joe, you really did it for me. But I don't think it's going to be a situation where you say, damn, Joe, you really did it to me. Moving on from there, mentioned him in my first video, kind of in a negative way, and I'll mention him again in a negative way, but also why I like him, and that's Caris Levert, Brooklyn Nets. I think he's listed between a small forward and a shooting guard, depending where you play. 78K fantasy draft, 4,400 FanDuel, 4K DraftKings. This is a great game, great game to target here. The Nets and the Knicks should be a high-scoring game with no defense played. Levert is showing a motor that, A, no one else on his team does, and B, very few people in the league do. We know that Joe Harris is still suffering with concussion symptoms. He's highly unlikely to play. We know that Sean Kilpatrick will not be playing either. He's got a hamstring issue. I do have some concern because Kenny Atkinson is just... Listen to my previous video. I just have no respect for Kenny Atkinson and what he's attempted to do with the Brooklyn Nets. Horrible coach, vastly overrated, has made the Nets a worse team. As if that could be possible, he's made them worse. He went out and signed Archie Goodwin because, Lord knows, without Sean Kilpatrick and Joe Harris, you can't just give extra minutes to your players. It would be a sin if somehow your players were seeing over 25 minutes a game. So that's a concern here, is just that Levert's not going to play more than 25 minutes, maybe 27 if they don't roll Goodwin out, but he's just not going to see a lot of time on the floor. So we have to trust that in that time he's going to be able to exceed the 20 to 24 point mark. I have confidence in it. New York is really an awful team. Carmelo Anthony is not going to be playing defense. Levert should have a ton of opportunities for steals and breakaways, rebounds. Whatever it is that you want him to do, he can probably do it in a short amount of time, so he's on my short list tonight. Last up, we'll go to the Nuggets and Clippers, and it's a game I feel uneasy about because the Clippers at this point are fantasy kryptonite. Not only are none of their players viable, but they're making the players of the other teams not viable. I don't know why and I don't know how, but it's happening. So with that being said, I like Will Barton, 10-5 fantasy draft, 5,300 FanDuel and DraftKings. When you see something like Wilson Chandler and Danilo Gallinari are out, that is a ton of usage. Jokic is not a usage monster because he does so much more for the team, and while I do think there should be some more opportunities for him to score in this one, it's going to fall on the likes of Gary Harris and Will Barton. I can almost assure you Will Barton will not start this game, but I'm pretty confident that he's going to be able to finish around that 30-minute mark, and if he does that, he makes for an excellent play, someone who I think can get you anywhere between 25 and 50, and that's a realistic estimate based off of what he's done in the past. If the team lets him machine and do what he wants to do, and the biggest thing there being if the three-point shot is falling, the upside's huge because they'll feed him. If the three-point shot is not falling, you're definitely looking more towards a 25 to 30-point mark, which is fine. I don't think anybody's going to complain if you end up with 30 points from someone who's 5.3K on either site. So he's a guy I think you have to look into tonight. With that being said, that will conclude our video. Please make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Head over to researchfantasy.com. Subscribe to our NBA mailing list. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @ResearchAndWin. And join us again tomorrow.